Should the monarchy be smaller? Is happiness as important as the economy? And are more NHS strikes justified? This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative MP Mark Garnier, Labour's Kim Leadbeater, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats Daisy Cooper, and Camilla Tominey from the Daily Telegraph. Today,
it's a good day for NHS staff, it's a good day for patients, an opportunity now to get that pay into staff's pay packets next month and for everyone to move forward together.
We could see, as we've said, unfortunately, strike action up until Christmas if there's not a better deal put on the table.
Should nurses accept the government's pay deal and rule out further strikes?
When you hear sometimes people refer to a slimmed-down monarchy, I can't imagine what that might mean for a role like yours.
I think the slim down was said in a day when there were a few more people around to make that seem like a justifiable comment.
Ahead of this weekend's coronation, what kind of royal family do the public want?
From April next year, we'll start measuring our progress as a country, not just by how our economy is growing, but by how our lives are improving.
That was over a decade ago. My guest Kim Leadbeater also says well-being should be a top government priority. And Rishi Sunak will face Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions for the final time before tomorrow's local elections. Well, we're only a few days away ahead of the coronation, so let's start with a discussion on the royal family. This headline in The Times. Princess Anne, smaller monarchy, not a good idea. As a keen royal watcher, Camilla, let's start with you. Is she right? Has she got a point? I mean, this follows on reported remarks by now King Charles, saying that actually he wants to overhaul the institution and that might mean a slimmed-down monarchy.
So cast your minds back to the Diamond Jubilee in 2012, and there was an appearance on the Buckingham Palace balcony that was slimmed down. It was just the so-called Magnificent Seven, the Queen, not Prince Philip because he was in hospital, the King now, as he's now known, and Camilla, William and Kate, and Harry at the time, and that was basically it. And it did put some other royals' noses out of joint because they felt that they were being scaled back. He's got to balance, hasn't he, appearing to be value for money and looking like he's running an efficient organisation, but at the same time representing all of the charities and going to all of the events and unveiling all of the plaques and planting all of the trees that the royals have always done. And that's why Anne is interesting with this intervention. She's right to say that when he said this, it was before the Duke and Duchess of Sussex had departed and before the Duke of York had stepped back from royal duties. But the way she does being a royal is slightly different to the younger generation because she does rack up all the engagements and make sure she crams them in. So she's doing a lot of pressing the flesh, whereas the likes of William and Kate now are doing more thematic royalty. They're talking in general about mental health and not necessarily going to multiple engagements in a day. I think it's good to have that mix, but it's true to say that there are kind of too few royals to go around when you consider how many organisations that the Queen, the late Queen and Prince Philip represented that now don't have a patron because they're no longer with us.
Well, it was quite candid, if you like, by the Princess Royal, or deliberate, I suppose, in that sense, in that interview. But we are only a few days before the coronation of King Charles III. What do you make of the build-up to it?
Well, last week I was a little bit concerned that nobody really cared too much and it was passing people by. And maybe there's been a bit of royal fatigue because we have had the Platinum Jubilee last year and indeed the Queen's funeral.
But we can see these rehearsals.
Well, the rehearsal then happens and I understand that people did camp out in the Mall for a coveted glimpse of this gold state coach for the first time. And actually I think the bunting is being unfurled this week and there's a bit more excitement about the event. At the end of the day, this is something that many of us have not seen in our lifetimes. Are we likely to see another one? Well, not the older generation, certainly. It's going to be a spectacle. We had a briefing from Buckingham Palace yesterday, most of which is under embargo, but suffice to say that, you know, visually it's going to be as astonishing as you'd expect of a ceremony of such pomp and pageantry. It's going to try and be as inclusive as possible with regard to the service. And, of course, you then get the whole royal family side of things, and there's obviously going to be a narrative around Prince Harry and who is and isn't on the balcony and all the rest of it. So for copy purposes, we're delighted with this event at the Telegraph.
Well,
whether it engages the general public will remain to be seen, I guess.
Well, absolutely. And also, obviously, pleasing the press, very important. But more important is to please the public if they're into this sort of thing. Let's go back to the Princess Royal's comments, Mark, about a smaller monarchy. Do you think it is a good idea to have it slimmed down? You don't?
No, I think they do a fantastic job. The Princess Royal was in my constituency the other day, and you can see the people turn out. They absolutely love it. A couple of years ago, we had the Duke of Gloucester was unveiling a statue, and that engagement, that sort of handshaking of people, it brings it that much closer. And I think getting out there and talking to people is very important.
But there's been a lot of talk about modernising the institution. I mean, Camilla is talking about differences between the older and younger generation set of royals. Do you think he's right, King Charles, referring to the idea of overhauling it in that way?
I think it's a really important discussion to take place, and now feels the right time to have that conversation. I thought it was a really good interview with Princess Anne. I thought she did a fantastic job. And I was in Parliament yesterday for the King and the Queen coming, and certainly there was a huge amount of enthusiasm there for the coronation. But it's an important time to have a conversation about the concept of the monarchy and then the individuals within the establishment. I mean, I'm very patriotic. I'm very proud to be British, and I associate the monarchy with part of that Britishness. But there's also conversations to be had about how much money it costs versus how much money it brings in. And I think that's where sort of a lot of the public are. I think you've got some people who are very staunch monarchists, you've got some people who are very staunch Republicans, but the vast majority of people are somewhere in the middle. And I think there's not many people who would want to get rid of the monarchy, but what does it look like and what does it mean for 2023?
Yeah, where do you stand on this?
Well, I think it probably should be slimmed down, and I think King Charles himself has indicated that that's the direction of travel. Clearly, the coronation is smaller than what had been planned before at his request, and clearly it's an institution that needs to modernise like every institution. So I think it's the right direction of travel.
Right, so slimmed down being smaller in the sense of people involved in those activities and duties.
Well, there's been a bit of discussion in the last couple of days, hasn't there, about what that might look like, whether it's the number of people that are involved or perhaps what tasks or the duties they perform, or whether actually it should be keep the same number of people but reduce expenditure on, buildings instead. I mean, really, there's all sorts of different ways you could cut the cloth, but I think King Charles himself has set that direction of travel. Well,
actually, just ahead of all the events, this in the Daily Telegraph, man arrested outside Buckingham Palace after throwing shotgun cartridges into grounds. This was yesterday. It was quite a shock, actually. The whole area was cordoned off. People were evacuated. Any news or update? I know we can't say much because someone has been arrested, but in terms of the sort of atmosphere and whether it's led to a thought about reviewing perhaps security arrangements.
I mean, I think also there was a controlled explosion, and obviously that entire area was cordoned off. The thing about the palace is it is pretty accessible to the public. You can walk right in front and up to the gates. There'll be a ring of steel around this whole operation anyway, not to mention all of the police officers that are coming from forces around the country, combined with a huge military presence, means that, to be fair, the security is always well thought out and well planned. Will it be stepped up in light of this? Yes. But then the concern has always been around, when it comes to threats on the royals, fixated individuals rather than sort of, group protest activity. That said, I think Republic and campaign groups will be staging more protests. Graham Smith, the CEO, I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, we're stepping it up because we feel we can campaign more vociferously now that the Queen is no longer with us.
Right, well, that's interesting because actually we might be able to just go further ahead to this report in The Guardian. Anti-monarchists receive intimidatory Home Office letter on new protest laws. Now, this bill, the Public Order Bill, has received royal assent. It was always intended to receive royal assent, I should say. But some of the powers that the police are getting have been brought forward, apparently, to today ahead of the coronation. They were going to get them, but it wasn't going to happen for a few months' time. And letters apparently have been sent to these groups, anti-monarchist groups, warning them of what might happen in terms of any offences committed. Is that rather heavy-handed?
I'd like to see the letters. I mean, I fear it could be. So I think, but as I say, without seeing the letters, it's a bit difficult. If the letters are just sort of saying, look, you need to be aware that there are new rules about this, then I think it's fair that people should be informed of where the rules have changed. But if the letters are threatening, then I think that is. But as I said, I'd like to see the letters. Well,
my understanding is they are setting out just the powers that have now come in.
In that case, that's a public service letter.
Right, do you agree with that? I mean, is the Home Office just doing its job? Actually, people may congratulate the Home Office and the government on bringing in these new powers. Yes, royal assent for the bill, but new powers to the police coming in slightly earlier.
Again, like Mark, I haven't seen the letters, but it sounds to me as though they could be slightly heavy-handed. We have to protect people's right to protest. I mean, what happened yesterday was very different. That was obviously something much more sinister and dangerous. But we've got to allow people the ability to protest. But what I do say is that, you were talking about public engagement, and certainly in my constituency, people are embracing this coronation. I'm dashing around on Sunday to about 10 different events. People are putting the bunting up. People are baking
a lot of cake.
I will be having a lot of cake, which is always a good thing. But so I think there is real public appetite. But and again, it's how you balance that with people's right to protest when they do feel passionately about something. But I would urge everybody to keep those protests peaceful if they feel that that's the right thing to do. And for those that want to enjoy this weekend as the celebration that it is, let's go out there and have something positive to focus on. That is one thing that the royal family is good at doing, is giving us a focus in terms of unity in many different respects. So hopefully we can get that balance right.
And just before I come to you, Daisy, just to give a bit of context in terms of a BBC poll, Camilla, last week, 58%, majority of those polled, believe that Britain should continue to have a monarchy, less popular amongst younger people, of course. What does that say? I mean, it's also quite a lot of people who don't, which may underline what you said about the likelihood of protests.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is perhaps a problem with the younger generation. The under-30s don't seem to be as enthused about the idea of a monarchy than older generations. That may be a problem going forward. Obviously, there's a lot of store being set by the future of the monarchy, not in the King and Queen Camilla's hands, but actually in the hands of the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children, who I'm sure will feature prominently this weekend, because that kind of signals the dawn of a new kind of era for the House of Windsor. In general, however, how do the royals feel about these polls? I think the King himself has said in interviews in the past, the popularity goes up, it goes down. The continuity of the crown has endured for 1,000 years. I think it's overstretching it to say that it faces an existential crisis. I think when it comes to younger people, they need to leave less unsaid. That mantra of sort of never complain, never explain came back to bite William and Kate during that Caribbean tour. And I think William has said, we do need to discuss more of these issues.
Right. I mean, but that is interesting in terms of where people actually stand. Will they actually express that idea of protest over the weekend of the coronation or not? I mean, 26% of those polled want an elected head of state. Where do you think the balance should lie? As I say, there'll be many people who think good that these new powers have come to the police because it will prevent, or more likely to prevent, any disruption to the coronation. On the other hand, that's a lot of people who might want to say, this is not for me.
We have a very strong and proud tradition in this country of having freedom of speech and of having freedom of peaceful protest as well. Liberal Democrats opposed a number of the measures that the government introduced because in some examples, I think under the new laws, you could arrest people who have perhaps linked their arms together, for example, and people who make a noise. Of course, if you're going to go on a protest, the whole point of taking part in a protest is to make some noise. So I do think that the government's draconian measures have gone far too far. Like others, I haven't seen the actual letter, I haven't seen the tone of it. I have seen some groups that are intending to protest say they've been working very closely with the police, they've been working very well with them to explain what they're planning to do, and they want to do everything within the law as it stands. And I think in that context, it does appear to me to be perhaps heavy-handed and certainly not a good look that this is happening just a few days before the coronation.
What do you think, Mark?
I think people should have the right to protest, but I think people should also have the right to go to work. And I think that where you see protest inflicting itself on other people's lives and making other people's lives unlivable for one reason or another, then it's a huge problem. But I think it's, you have to take a very, very difficult path between this. And I think that if the police are intimidating people from not protesting, then I think we have to be worried about that. But equally so, I think the vast majority of people want to celebrate this weekend. They want to drink a lot of cheap Prosecco and get the bunting out and all this kind of stuff. That's how I'm going to be doing it. And they'd rather do it without necessarily having other people's views forced on them. And I think if the whole thing is spoiled, it's a great shame. Bear in mind, I mean, on the size of the monarchy, I mean, I think this is expected to cost £100 million to put this thing on. The economic benefit is £3 billion. And that's an awful lot of benefit, and I think we have to, work.
It's still £100 million, of course.
Yeah, but it's £3 billion into the economy. I mean, it's, there's a lot of people coming over to watch this stuff. There's a lot of cheap Prosecco for £3 billion.
How are you going to be celebrating, if at all?
Oh, there's lots of lovely events happening in St Albans. There's a get-together in Greenwood Park on Saturday, which I hope to go to, and some events on our beautiful Charter Market, and again in London Coney on Sunday. So I'm hoping to pop into all of those.
Well, enjoy if you are going out to celebrate. But let's draw your attention to this in The Independent. NHS unions vote to accept government pay deal, but nurses could still strike. This was actually yesterday. The NHS pay deal was signed off after a majority of health unions backed the deal, and it's going to apply to all NHS staff, apart from doctors and dentists in England. It means NHS workers will receive a 5% pay rise plus a one-off bonus payment of at least £1,500 or just over £1,500. They should see that pay rise, workers, employees, next month, and the bonus in the summer. But some unions, including the Royal College of Nursing, you heard Pat Cullen, the General Secretary in the headlines, and the Unite Union, say they remain in dispute with the government and have threatened further strike action. Should they just accept the deal, those two unions, and call off the strikes?
I think they should, yeah. I think at the end of the day, we've got to get to the end of this. A lot of people are becoming increasingly worried about whether the NHS is going to be available for them if they need it. You can push this too far. And I think nurses have a lot of sympathy behind them. If you look at the opinion polls,
they do.
A lot of people do it. But at the end of the day, when you start seeing problems with people's delivery of operations or care, do they necessarily blame the government, or do they actually blame the institution that's causing the problems? And I think you can run this too far. It's a fair deal, and I think they really ought to get behind it, as it is everybody else.
I mean, I think sadly it's a real mess, isn't it? And it's a mess that's been dragging on for far too long, and the government have to take responsibility for this. We were calling on them to speak to nurses, to speak to doctors, to speak to teachers months ago, and they weren't engaging with them. And they're not striking because they just want more money. They're striking because of recruitment, retention, and because of service levels that they simply can't offer because they have been so stretched and underfunded for over a decade. And I think that's what we need to remember. This is not just about money. It's about people who are exhausted and are leaving the profession because of the conditions that they're working under.
So you would support further strikes?
I think the main thing is to negotiate. The main thing is to get those people back round the table. That's been far too long coming. And if people are still saying that they're not happy with the deal, get them round the table, have those conversations. There's been a huge amount of arrogance, I think, unfortunately, from the government on this, and it just shows how out of touch they are. You know, I have friends who teach, I have friends who are nurses. Things are really difficult for them, whether that's the real poverty side of this, which is people using food banks, or it's the fact that they are just utterly exhausted and having to take on so much more than they should have to do.
What's wrong with that?
So I got a letter from our local acute hospital trust. The nurses and the doctors and the porters that do go to work are absolutely exhausted by the fact that they're having to step in and bail out the spaces which are left by those people who choose to go on strike. It's causing friction internally within the NHS, as I see it in my local...
But it's within the government's hands to solve that.
But they have been... Look, the vast majority have come behind this. The vast majority have agreed that this is a settlement which they can go with. It's just... And even Pat Cullen actually got behind it. It's nurses have voted against it. It's a few diehards.
But I think don't walk away from it. That's what I would say. Keep going. We've got to get a resolution because, again, as you say, we're all suffering, but it's only going to get worse if we don't get round, you guys don't get round the table and sort it out.
Well, let's be clear, the government has handled this appallingly badly. I mean, the government, took the nurses to court. I was looking on doors last night in my constituency, and one guy who's a teacher said to me, he said, look, if the government's going to take nurses to court, he said, it's a sure sign they really don't care about people like me. That's what a lot of public sector workers...
I mean, to be clear, that was about their mandate to strike. They hadn't had the time, or they couldn't continue to strike.
But to take the government, for the government to take nurses to court over technicality, rather than getting round the table, I think is really severe. And, as others have said, there are major problems. Even the unions that have agreed to this pay deal say there is a huge amount to be hammered out with the government over safety conditions, over patient safety, over staffing levels, over pensions, over all sorts of recruitment, retention issues. And the government really hasn't even started to negotiate on any of those areas either. So we've got a very, very long way to go until we're going to solve the problems facing the NHS workforce.
Was it the wrong approach to take them to court?
Well, everybody's got to abide by the law. I mean, at the end of the day, if there is, it may be a technicality, but the point is you can't have one section of society excluded from the law because you feel sorry for them. And at the end of the day, it's important that everybody is playing by the same rules.
It's not about feeling sorry for people. It's about people who've kept our country going through the most difficult times and are really, really struggling. And I think to take that decision, to take that, to make this a legal matter, I just think it sends all the wrong messages. But hang on. But
Daisy, I haven't heard. Do you believe the strikes should continue if they get a mandate, the RCN, as they're going to try to do? Would you support further strikes?
Well, the nurses have a legal right to decide if they want to strike,
Absolutely.
so it's up to the nurses to decide whether or not they want to do
Or
that.
should they just accept the pay deal like the other unions?
Well, as I say, it's up to the members of the Royal College of Nursing to decide if they want to strike or not. They have a right to make that decision. They have a right to decide whether they want to go on strike or not. Clearly, all of us want to see strikes come to an end, but it has to be done in a way where we can solve some of the frustrations over pay, conditions and safe staffing levels as well, and we are clearly not there yet.
Should the government continue negotiating with the RCN and Unite?
I think there's the conversation to be had about these other elements in terms of the staffing levels and how many nurses we bring into recruitment and bring into training in the first place. And I think that the planning for the workforce in the NHS, I think, is a very, very important point. And Jeremy Hunt brought in some amendments on this when he was head of the...
Boris Johnson whips against it for 8 months.
Yeah, I know. Well, we got rid of Boris, so that's fine.
Oh, right, well, let's say it's all fine, shall we?
Camilla, can I just show you this graph? Changes in pay since 2010, when you take inflation into account. If you look there at nurses, down by 10.2%. They're quite stark, those figures, aren't they, in terms of cuts in pay? Teachers, obviously, you can see also even more, and junior doctors down by 14 or just over 14%.
Yeah.
You can see why the public has had quite a lot of sympathy.
Well, they'll look stark against inflation rates of over 10%. Of course they will.
But it is right. But even so, it is since 2010, of course, heightened by high inflation at the moment, which is at 10%. But broadly speaking, particularly teachers' pay is flatlined.
Sure. I mean, in the case of teachers, you can have a separate debate, frankly, about education funding versus NHS. Education funding since 2010 has been 3%. NHS funding has been 42%. So where does that leave schools? We can have these arguments. I think from other workers, you've said private sector workers there, their pay has marginally gone up by 1.9%. But, of course, that's not been reflected in their pensions. Pensions are often not mentioned when it comes to public sector worker strikes. There's no way private sector workers can expect anything like the pensions that are going to be paid to people who work for the NHS and, indeed, for schools. Second of all, most rational people think it's completely unreasonable to ask for 19% or, in the case of junior doctors, 35%. It's just, that's, just some sort of strange dreamland that will only serve to push inflation up even further, make everything more expensive for everyone. Also, can we not have this kind of hierarchy of people who are serving and being served by the NHS? What about the patients in all this? What about the people who have been waiting for 18 months for a hip replacement, who have then had to have it delayed further because there's more strikes? I thought unionism was about collectivism. If the majority of the unions are going to accept this pay deal, what's the RCN's excuse?
Well, because the majority of their members did not. What do you think in response to Camilla?
I think that, of course, the strikes are a tragedy for both patients and for NHS staff. But let's be clear about the situation facing nurses specifically. 2/3 of nurses earn less than the national average wage. 1 in 4 hospitals now have food banks set up for nurses and other hospital workers. I think patients recognise that when they are ill and they need life-saving care, it's the nurses that hold their hands, that feed them, that, clean them when they need that kind of help. I've been an inpatient and had nurses and doctors save my life, and I'm completely indebted to them. I think the way the government has treated nurses has been utterly, utterly appalling. They should have been solved months ago.
But I've often asked this of both Labour and the Lib Dems, what percentage pay rise would you give nurses
Liberal Democrats have said very clearly for months and months and months now that we wanted to see a pay increase as close to inflation as possible.
So you're not worried about the inflationary effect of that on everybody else's
That has been roundly debunked. There is no inflationary pressure from increasing...
roundly debunked, Daisy.
You do not increase... you do not have that problem when you increase public sector pay.
Yes, you do. You do, because you're increasing the money supply. And on top of that, you're also increasing taxes on everybody else. It is.
Well, that is a question. How would you pay for an 8, 9, 10% pay rise?
Well, look, this is a problem facing the government right now, OK? We've said that we would have to negotiate on all these different issues.
But let's just say you wanted to give an 8% pay rise. Let's just pull that figure out, a little bit less than inflation. To give that level of pay rise to all public sector workers would cost, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, multi-billions of pounds.
Well, Liberal Democrats have pointed out that the government has wasted billions and billions and billions of pounds in the last few years on a track and trace system that was found by the Public Accounts Committee that will make no difference whatsoever, on PPE that couldn't be used, on PPE that went up in flames.
Does it
so
mean
the government's wasted
taxes?
a huge amount of money.
Does it mean higher taxes? Because we're already taxed at the highest level.
I was going to say the government is already putting a tax burden on the population.
The Conservatives reversed some of the money that banks could have been paying, right? right. So this isn't about taxing ordinary workers. The government have left loopholes for big banks, the bank surcharge, the bank levy. The government reversed those. You've been raising money from those areas.
But on that, the bank surcharge was brought in specifically to pay for the cost of bailing out the banks, and then also to pay as an insurance premium against banks going bust, whilst the Banking Reform Act came into place by 2019. That's now in place, and actually the investments into things like Lloyds Bank have actually made money. So you've got a slightly different thing. So you don't need the bank levy. But bear in mind,
you could have it, and then you could use that money to pay for some of these pay increases.
So you could. But the
See, there we go. There you could. There's an answer.
He's agreed. He's signed up to your Liberal
Conservative MP who signed up to a Liberal Democrat policy.
The City of London generates something in the region of £100 billion in tax receipts. This is an incredibly important part. We're already seeing listings on the London Stock Exchange now moving to America. If we don't have a successful City of London, and this is about a whole load of different things in terms of financial services regulation, if we don't have a successful City of London, we can hate the bankers if you want to, but we are losing an awful lot of tax receipts. And that's an awful lot of public services which are going to be diminished by getting it wrong with institutions like the City of London.
I mean, some of the things you've suggested, of course, are one-off savings, and these would be permanent pay rises. Can you see a way of paying for that sort of level of pay rise permanently?
I think Daisy's point is really important in terms of, as opposition parties, we are constantly asked how we would sort this mess out. But it's their mess. It's the government's mess. So,
but
yes,
it might be something that you have to take on
and we
in
will
18
sadly
months' time.
inherit a lot of this mess. But I hope people remember how we got into this point when it comes to local elections and indeed the general election. This is because of 13 years of mismanagement of the economy, not least to mention the crashing of the economy last October with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. And I know we don't want to keep going back over the past, but that really was an important moment in time where things got worse for a lot of people. And Daisy's point again about writing off billions of pounds of fraud, that shouldn't be allowed to happen.
No, but it's again, how would you provide for it now if you wanted those level of pay rises?
Well, we said we would recruit more doctors and nurses by getting rid of the non-dom tax status, which I think is not a good policy. But also
not increase their wages.
Again, well, also getting round that table and having those conversations and having those discussions, that's the important piece of work that needs to be done and has been done really, really badly.
Just before we move on, Mark, when you look at those figures, those changes in pay since 2010, you probably can't see them, but I will repeat them for you. Drop in 11%, 10.2% for nurses, 11% for teachers and junior doctors of 14% since 2010. Can you see the justification for going on strike over pay?
I can see why people would be very angry. Of course I can. But Camilla makes a very, very important point. By the time you take out the most recent bit of inflation, actually those aren't so terrible. And bear in mind, Kim, we have ultimately got to go back to where this all started, which is that the country was spending way too much money back in 2010, and we had to...
Talking of going back to ancient
Alistair
history,
Darling, who brought in
I think that's a very weak argument, Mark. We're going back 13 years.
But it's really important because that's... Camilla made the right point. We've increased spending on the NHS by £45 billion.
Because you've got an ageing... You're firefighting, but also if you think back to...
We have to also, just a very quick point,
very briefly.
2008, ultra-low interest rates for 13 years.
Yeah, the one they continue for a very long time.
Combined with huge amounts of quantitative easing. I get that it's easy to bash the government on it. Questions need to be asked about how the Bank of England has managed our finances for the last decade. I'm sorry.
All right, well, let's leave that point just for the moment. We're going to talk about happiness. You'll be pleased to know. In line with the economy, we've talked about the economy. A transformation in health and social care should be at the heart of a Labour government's mission. So says my guest here, Kim Leadbeater. You've just published a report setting out some of the ideas. You want to see the Treasury taking control of health and well-being decisions, which you say will save money in the long run. Is it the government's job to make us happy?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily use the word happy, although happiness is part of this. It's about health and it's about well-being. And actually, this segues in beauty from the point I was just making. We've had 13 years of a Conservative government who haven't done half as much as they should have done on prevention and early intervention when it comes to ill health. What we're continually seeing is trying to find money for the NHS, which we know is a battle, and it'll be a battle for whoever runs the next government. So I think we need to take a more preventative approach to health and well-being of the nation. And I think we need to do that by taking a cross-government approach. So we obviously assess everything when it comes to the economy. We're starting to assess everything quite rightly in terms of the environment. But what about the well-being of the country? And this is about supporting people to make healthy choices. And what the government's role in that is not nanny state, I'm totally against that, but it's about how we can support people to look after the health and well-being of their families.
But it would be government intervention, wouldn't it? Taking a more muscular role.
I think it's having policies in place that enable healthy choices.
Right, and do you think then the health and well-being of the country is as important as the economy or as tackling climate change?
I absolutely do. And there's a clear link between health and wellbeing and the economy, because if we get this stuff right, if we get the prevention and the early intervention and the policies right, we will save money in the long term. And that's the really powerful economic argument for this.
And what specifically are you talking about? You talk about social prescribing in the report. What is that?
So social prescribing is one aspect of this, but this is a really holistic approach. It's a holistic approach in different ways. So looking at physical health, mental health, social health and wellbeing as well. So, and that's what my degree is in, that's what my background's in. So taking that holistic, joined-up approach, doing that across every government department. So whether it's looking at things like social prescribing, which is basically using the NHS to refer people to groups, it can be things like addressing loneliness and isolation, so looking at befriending services. It can be things like joining the local walking group, joining a local mental health group.
Rather than handing out drugs or...
Rather than handing out tablets. You know, we're dealing a lot of things by just writing more prescriptions, which cost money and don't actually get to the root cause.
But these would cost money too, I presume.
This is it, and we've got to look at that transition from how we have a little bit of money to get us going, but then changing that culture, which is really, really important.
Good idea?
I think the principle's a very good idea. I mean, I think in a first world country like the UK, then why wouldn't we look at all this sort of stuff? And I think,
but you're not doing.
Well, it's because you end up having massive arguments about sugar tax and the nanny state. And this is a very interesting point. We've just been talking about the NHS. We can raise money from sugar tax, but actually, should we be doing the nanny state on sugar tax? But it will deal with obesity up to a point. Alcohol tax. Why are we allowing smoking? I mean, I'm asking these questions hypothetically rather than necessarily advancing these as policies in the interest of not getting inundated by in the Twitter sphere afterwards.
Oh, don't worry about that.
But I've had conversations. I met with Henry Dimbleby, who was working with the government on the obesity strategy, and he resigned because he'd had enough of it. You know, there's ways of doing this which are a supportive way, supportive strategies. Working with businesses. You know, I'm doing stuff at the minute with Coca-Cola and various other big businesses who want to change. They want to improve things, but you've got to work with them. And I think being scared of this nanny statism is not the right approach. This is about us looking after our citizens, and it's supporting them to make the right choices. And I think government has got a really important role to play in that. We want people to live long, healthy lives, and that's an important part of politics as far as I'm concerned.
Well, interestingly, you mentioned nanny state and sugar tax. This headline in The Times, ban smoking and tax orange juice, says the former Conservative Chancellor George Osborne. He insists that anti-nanny state Conservatives are not worth listening to. What did you think when you heard and read that, Camilla?
Well, I don't really think I need to be preached to by George Osborne as to how to live my life. I think actually sometimes nothing gives me greater happiness than playing football with Kim, because we play in the same football team. Oh. And actually the idea of kind of doing team sport and getting out and about, I think we all can agree is great for the well-being not only of adults but also of our children. Yep. There surely needs to be a simple message here that, you know, people need to live their lives in a degree of moderation. Eat less, do more. You can have some treats, but don't make it the predominance. The Henry Dimbleby book is frightening in what he predicts for obesity in this country come, I think it's 2040. However, you know, people like Coca-Cola and Co will tell you that a full-fat Coke 30 years ago tastes like you're drinking pure sugar cubes. They've brought that down. People make healthier choices, but people must have the choice. It's about education, surely.
Yeah, but you've talked about the economy and the economic benefits. Some of the figures are quite staggering. NHS England spends around £10 billion a year treating type 2 diabetes. If you prevented the number of cases with government intervention or NHS intervention, wouldn't that make economic sense?
You could say about government intervention, I think there needs to be more of an onus on food producers to take a lot of sugar that is hidden in stuff. You know, you go to the supermarket, you think you're getting a healthy meal, it's not. This whole old-fashioned ideal that we're all going to be eating like we were in the 1940s can't happen because lots of mums, who predominantly are the ones who cook for the kids, aren't at home, they're at work. If I get home at the end of a busy day, I do not want to start making a roast dinner from scratch. I'm sorry, it just doesn't happen. It would be helpful if food producers didn't start cramming a load of rubbish into the food that we think is healthy and we're feeding our children.
Well, then that's more government regulation.
Well, I would rather it started with the food producers than the government telling us endlessly what we should and shouldn't eat. Also on well-being, you know, the left makes all of these points about well-being. You know what stresses a lot of kids out? Loads of kind of apoplectic and apocalyptic warnings about climate. That stresses kids out. You talk about well-being. What's had the most detrimental effect on our children's well-being over the last 10 years? It's social media and the internet.
Yep.
Okay?
That's part of it.
If my kids are stressed out, it's not when they're out playing football or in the park. It's because something's happening on social media that is making them feel terrible about themselves.
There is a cross-party consensus now that there does need to be a preventative approach, and the phrase is that the National Health Service isn't a National Health Service, it's a National Treatment Service, and treat people when they're ill. So there is a cross-party consensus, but what I hear from public health professionals in particular is that whilst everyone agrees with all of this, there hasn't yet been a government that has the teeth and the boldness to actually implement some of these things. Now, with all due respect to Kim, there's lots of these ideas in this report that have been around for donkey's years, for decades in some cases, and there are lots of different governments of all colours that have failed to implement these things. So what I think health professionals want to see, I think what patients and the public want to see, is a political party that has a plan. Liberal Democrats have been very clear about our plans, for example, on dentistry, where we've set out very clearly how we would reform the contract so people can get access to a dentist when they need to see one. That would prevent oral health conditions that can lead to other diseases and infections. That is a very clear idea about how you would achieve that.
And we've discussed the issue of dentists and the shortage of NHS dentists, but what about making it the heart of a government agenda, well-being?
Look, I do think it's a very good idea, and I think with the general principles we're all 100% in agreement around this table. But one of the things when it comes to food is all these terrible additives that go into food actually makes food cheap, and it makes it affordable for an awful lot of people. And the problem is actually there is a link between obesity and poverty. And this is one of the problems. How do we get good, healthy food to people that is not going to be beyond...
Well, partly we try and eradicate poverty.
But you need a government. You need a government that supports its farmers so that food that is grown locally in this country improves our food security. People get fresh fruit and veg on their plate from nearby farms, and that's something the government is really failing to do.
But that's why this is such a big change, and people want change. People are desperate for change. But to have a Labour government that would put this in place at the heart of its policy, I think is what people would support, and I think it would set us apart from what we've had for the last 13 years.
Let's welcome BBC News and our viewers from BBC News, and we're going to talk about the local elections because they are happening tomorrow evening. Polling stations will open for people voting in local elections across England. Let's talk to our resident expert, Professor Sir John Curtice from the BBC's election studio. He's from the University of Strathclyde. Hello to you. John, what's at stake in these elections?
Well, formally at stake are the seats on 230 councils. In some cases, 1/3 of the seats on the council, but in most cases, all of the seats on that council. This is the year in which, in particular, elections are held in many of the more pro-Conservative, pro-Leave voting parts of rural England, where they have elections once every 4 years, and this is the year in which they happen. So that's what's formally at stake. But of course, politically, our interest is in the fact that these are the first elections to take place since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, the first elections to take place since the Labour Party began regularly enjoying quite substantial double-digit leads in the opinion polls. And therefore, we are asking the question above all, do these local elections confirm the message of the opinion polls that the Conservatives are in deep electoral trouble and that maybe the Labour Party has a chance of getting an overall majority at the next general election?
Now, there's an awful lot of expectation management by the parties, have been for a few weeks. What, in your mind, does success, failure look like for both the Conservatives and the Labour Party?
Well, a lot of that expectation management, of course, focuses on claims and counterclaims about how many seats they will gain or lose. And the crucial thing you have to remember, however, is that most of the seats that are being contested tomorrow were last contested in May 2019. Now, to be honest, May 2019 is now psephological prehistory. Theresa May was Prime Minister, remember? The Conservative Party was in deep trouble in the opinion polls. It's just that on that occasion, the Labour Party was also in deep trouble in the opinion polls, and neither party did very well in the local elections. So to that extent, at least, claims about gains and losses are against a baseline that doesn't make a great deal of sense. To be honest, my advice to people in the end is that's not going to be the crucial measure, whatever the claims and counterclaims about what the parties expect, not least because 5,000 of the 8,000 seats are in those shire district councils I referred to earlier. They're disproportionately located in that part of England. Rather, what you'll need to look for and wait for on the Friday afternoon is our attempt, and we won't be the only people trying to do this, but our attempt to estimate what would have happened if the whole country had had the chance to vote in local elections and people had behaved in the way that they did in these local elections. That's a calculation we make every year. Now then, we can come up with some pretty clear benchmarks. So, Labour are further ahead in the opinion polls now than they have been at any other previous points since 2010 when local elections have taken place. Labour's best performance so far, a 7-point lead over the Conservatives in 2012. So at minimum on this measure, Labour need to be more than 7 points ahead. And to be honest, I think they probably want a double-digit lead because that would begin to look something like the kinds of leads that Tony Blair enjoyed before 1997 and David Cameron did before 2010.
John Curtice, we have Daisy Cooper here from the Liberal Democrats too. What about their performance in 2019 compared to now?
Yeah, well, as it follows from the fact that I said neither the Labour nor the Conservatives did terribly well in 2019, that actually the Liberal Democrats did rather well. At that point, at least, it was their best performance in local elections since they entered into coalition with the Conservatives in 2010, although at an estimated share of 19%, it was still well below what they were regularly getting before 2010. So the honest truth is, therefore, the Liberal Democrats have a bit of a tough gig this time because they're going to have to do better than they did in 2019 to make significant gains, though, of course, if the Conservatives slip back a bit and the Liberal Democrats simply manage to stand still, that might still result in them in getting net gains of council seats. But equally, if the Conservatives are simply up a bit on a very poor baseline and the Liberal Democrats only hold their own, they might actually lose seats, even though they've done quite well. Other group, of course, we should mention are the Greens. The Greens did well in 2019. It still stands as their best performance in local elections. So they again have the problem that they're defending a relatively high baseline.
Professor Sir John Curtice, thank you very much. And we'll be talking lots, I hope, tomorrow afternoon.
I believe on Friday afternoon, Joe.
Oh, Friday afternoon. Thank you. Thank you. Tomorrow is polling day, Friday afternoon. Yes, look forward to it. Professor Sir John Curtice there. Let's go into the chamber because we have Prime Minister's questions in just under 5 minutes' time. You can see it is filling up. And as we said before, this is the last Prime Minister's questions before those local elections tomorrow. And, of course, our special coverage on Friday. Yes, what do you think success will look like for the Conservatives, Mark Garnier?
Well, so under the expectation management thing, we're looking to lose 1,000 seats out of 8,000 being contested. But I'm disappointed that Labour are only going for 400 gains. I think you should be more ambitious at the Labour Party. I don't think I'd like to be a Liberal Democrat. I think John Curtice's point is actually very valid. The Liberal Democrats did very well out of the unpopularity of Conservatism and Labour back in 2019. We failed to get us out of the European Union, so it was a very, very bad day for us, and you guys have done very, very well.
Well, there you go. There's the first punt at spin for you. What about for you?
I think it's fascinating to see how the political landscape has changed since 2019, which John pointed out there. I mean, I was probably giving interviews in 2019 saying I would never get involved in politics, no matter what happens. So anyway, a lot's changed since then. I mean, look, I think we're going to do well, but there's no room for complacency. The other thing that I feel strongly about is getting people out to vote. I mean, I don't know what the turnout is estimated to be, but the big
it's always lower, isn't it? Quite a bit lower than a general election.
Yeah, and I think that says a lot about the political environment at the minute, that people don't feel engaged enough to vote. So I would encourage everyone to go out and vote. That's really important.
But do you agree with John Curtice that it should be a double-digit lead over the Conservatives if you want to have any sense of forming the next government?
You've got brilliant people like John who can do the stats and the percentage game and all the rest of it. I'm interested in what it looks like in my constituency and the area that I represent, and I think we're in with a good chance of keeping some seats and potentially gaining some seats. But the pressure is on the Tories. The pressure is not on us. The pressure is on the Tories, in terms of, this is a test for Rishi Sunak, isn't it? This is people's first chance to say what they think of his leadership. And the fact that he's tried to whitewash the Johnson years and the Liz Truss debacle and all the rest of it.
And so that is why the expectation is that Labour should do really, really well.
Fingers crossed if we get people out there. I think
the pressure, and is the pressure not on you and Sir Keir Starmer to prove that he can actually do enough and has done enough to progress the party to government?
I think it is, but the polls are suggesting that is the case. Let's just hope that those polls carry through to the local elections, and then we set ourselves up for the general election next time. And it's interesting to see how people vote, isn't it, in local elections? Do they vote on local issues, national issues?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting.
Difficult night for you?
Well, I mean, I hope not. Liberal Democrats do go into these elections from a very high sort of watermark, as it were. These are the seats we defended in 2019. We got our best set of election results for a very long time, and so we've got 1,200 seats that we're defending. But on top of that, we are hoping to make gains in many parts of the country, but especially in those blue wall areas where we want to win more council seats, and then hopefully
and blue wall areas being Conservative areas.
Blue wall seats being in the areas where Liberal Democrats are the key challengers to the Conservatives, and we hope that if we can win in those seats tomorrow, then that will send a signal that we are ambitious about winning those seats at the next general election as well.
Right. I mean, this is obviously going to be Prime Minister's questions ahead of those local elections. It'll no doubt come up in some form. How difficult are these elections going to be for Rishi Sunak? There isn't a sense, unless it is around 1,000 seats being lost by the Conservatives, which is probably unlikely, that he is under any threat.
No, I think before Christmas, people are saying if he has a bad local elections that it's going to be curtains. I don't think that's the case. I actually think, in line with what John Curtis is saying there, that the Conservatives won't do quite as badly as they're predicting because Rishi has steadied the ship a bit. And I don't think Labour will be doing as well as they would like, because I still don't think the electorate is completely convinced by Sir Keir Starmer. I don't think that they find him a dynamic and charismatic leader, and I don't think he's laid out enough of a clear policy platform to convince people. I appreciate that locals are very different to the general election, and Lib Dems do well because they're associated with sort of getting the bins out, and that's a good thing. They're associated also, to be fair, the Lib Dems always campaign very well. They've always got their,
and
the orange and yellow colours.
Investing in community facilities.
Across the home counties. I live near Chesham and Amersham, so I know what a great effort you put into that by-election. But I think they're going to be sort of reflective of 2024, but crikey, a week's a long time in politics, so I don't think we can make any predictions after Thursday as to what might happen.
I think you'll find there'll be a lot of predictions being made on Friday by the panel around whatever the results are. Would you like to defend your leader, Sir Keir Starmer? He hasn't quite...
Someone's got to.
Yeah.
I absolutely would defend him, and I would defend the entire Shadow Cabinet as well. If you look at where Labour was in 2019, and as I say, I wasn't involved in politics at that time, but if you look at the journey that we've been on since then, Keir has turned the party around. We've got a brilliant shadow front bench who go out there. Rachel Reeves was on the media this morning doing a fantastic job. I think we're building a real narrative of change for the country. We've got another, hopefully, 12 to 18 months to go before the general election, but the distance we have travelled since 2019 and those really poor election results is huge, and I think Keir deserves a huge amount of credit for that.
Right. I mean, there's no doubt that you can argue that he's neutralised some of the legacy of Jeremy Corbyn as the Labour Party sees it. And at that point, we're going inside the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At question number one.
Mr. Speaker, I know the House will join the nation and the Commonwealth in sending our very best wishes to Their Majesties the King and Queen ahead of the Parliament. This will be a moment of extraordinary national pride, a demonstration of our country's character, and an opportunity to look to the future in the spirit of service, unity and hope. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Sir Stephen Timms. Mr. Speaker, at question time last week, column 725, the Prime Minister referred to record numbers of people in work. In fact, as he knows, the number of people in work at the moment is still less than it was just before the pandemic, 122,792 less, according to the latest official figures. Will he reassure the House that he's not slipping into the bad ways of his predecessor but one? And will he properly correct the incorrect statement he made last week?
Mr. Speaker, that clarification has already been made, Mr. Speaker, in Hansard, but there are near record numbers of people in work and in payroll, and that is thanks to the actions of this government, Mr. Speaker, one record we're very proud of.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Non-compliant hand car washes seem like a cheap and quick way to have our cars washed. But unfortunately, behind this £1.8 billion industry is hidden money laundering, fraud, drug dealing, prostitution, labour abuse, modern-day slavery, tax avoidance and many other sinister crimes. This is an estimated £500 million lost in tax revenue, a pull factor for illegal migration, and the pollutants often used are damaging to the environment. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it's time that we now step away from the voluntary scheme and have a mandatory scheme to protect people?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we expect all businesses to follow the law, including providing fair pay and working conditions for their employees. We're tackling exploitation in the labour market, especially by increasing funding for enforcement bodies to over £35 million a year, and we will continue to keep the position of hand car washes under close review.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about the coronation? Across the House, we're all looking forward to the celebrations this weekend. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister know how many mortgage payers are paying higher rates since the Tory party crashed the economy last autumn?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our record on home ownership is crystal clear. Because of our tax cuts, 90% of first-time buyers now don't pay any stamp duty at all, Mr. Speaker. And last year we saw the largest number of people buying their first home in 20 years, Mr. Speaker. That's a Conservative government delivering on people's aspirations to own their own home.
Mr. Speaker, the question was how many people are paying more on their mortgages each month. And the answer that the Prime Minister avoided giving is 850,000. Nearly 1 million people paying more on their mortgage each month because his party used their money as a casino chip. That's why George Osborne called them economic vandals who created a self-inflicted financial crisis. Not for the Prime Minister and his non-dom thing, not for the super wealthy they gave tax cuts to, but for mortgage holders all across the country. So, does the Prime Minister know how many more people will be joining them on higher mortgage rates by the end of this year?
Mr. Speaker, thanks to the actions we're taking, in fact, the Bank of England is showing that public expectations of inflation have now eased to a 15-month low, Mr. Speaker. Consumer confidence is at the highest level that it's been at since Russia invaded Ukraine, and because of our stewardship of the public finances, we can see a clear way to reduce debt and bring interest rates down. But, Mr. Speaker, he keeps in this habit of quoting the former Labour shadow chancellors. We know that our plans will deliver lower inflation and lower interest rates, but we know that his plans just mean more debt, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, year after year after year. Those aren't my words, that's the assessment of the former Labour Shadow Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, the question was how many more people this year are going to be paying more on their mortgages? And the answer that he avoided giving again, he knows these answers. He's got the stats there in front of him. 930,000 people. So by the end of this year, I know they don't want to talk about it, that's why he won't answer the questions. By the end of this year, nearly 2 million homeowners, counting the cost of the Tories' economic vandalism with every mortgage payment they make. And it's not just those who already own their home that are counting the cost of Tory recklessness. The average deposit for a first-time buyer is going up to £9,000. Does he even know how long it would take an average saver to put that sort of money aside?
Mr. Speaker, that's why we've introduced a 95% mortgage guarantee scheme, Mr. Speaker. It's why we're helping people in social housing own their own home through our first homes and our shared home ownership schemes. But, Mr. Speaker, I said these things are working because I said last year we had a record number of first-time buyers, the highest number in 20 years. It was, Mr. Speaker, twice the number of first-time buyers than Labour ever managed, Mr. Speaker. So whilst Labour failed homeowners, the Conservatives are delivering for them.
Mr. Speaker, every week, whatever the topic, he stands there and pretends everything is fine across the country. And every week he does so, he reinforces just how out of touch he is. £9,000, ha ha ha, £9,000 would take 4 years. They think it's funny that 4 years for the average saver to save £9,000. Or to put it a different way, in terms the Prime Minister will understand, roughly the annual bill to heat his swimming pool. But for most people, 4 more years of scrimping is a hammer blow to their ambitions. And now he's kicking them when they're down, because his decision to scrap housing targets is killing the dream of home ownership for a generation. Why doesn't he admit he got it wrong and reverse it?
Mr. Speaker, I promised to put local people in control of new housing, and I'm proud that that's what I delivered within 6 weeks of becoming Prime Minister. Now, he wants to impose top-down housing targets, he wants to concrete over the green belt and ride roughshod over local communities. Now, previously, Mr. Speaker, he did say, he's on record and saying, local people, local communities should have more power, more control. Now he's U-turned. Just another in a long list of broken promises.
Mr. Speaker, the only power he's given to local communities not to build houses. And we know why he won't change course. He admitted it last month. His councillors simply don't want to build the houses local people need, so he's given them a way out. Picture the scene as he explains this to a family. Mum and Dad paying £4 extra on the mortgage because the Tories tanked the economy. Their eldest paying hundreds more in rent. Their youngest still stuck in the spare room because they need an extra £9,000 for a deposit. Then along comes the Prime Minister and merrily tells them, sorry for crashing the economy. We don't want to talk about that. Sorry I can't help you with the house building, but my councillors don't like it. Oh, and before I go, here's a massive council tax increase for your troubles. Why doesn't he stop the excuses, stop blaming everyone else, and just build some houses instead?
Mr. Speaker, our memories on that short. We all know what happened last time when they were in power. There was no money left for the country. But let's talk about the record. Let's talk about the Labour record on house building, Mr. Speaker. In London, the former Conservative mayor built 60,000 affordable homes in his first 5 years in office. How many did the current Labour mayor manage? Half of that, Mr. Speaker. In Wales, we need 12,000 new homes a year. How many have Labour built in the last year? Half of that, Mr. Speaker. As ever, Labour talk and the Conservatives deliver.
Mr. Speaker, debt doubled since 2010, growth down, tax up, the economy crashed. Mr. Speaker, they're going to need a bigger note. And it's right. But week after week, we debate the issues facing in this place. But looking beyond the elections tomorrow, we also have a hugely significant weekend coming up with the King's coronation. For most, this will be the first time they've seen a monarch crowned. And I hope, and I know across the House, people will hope that people across the country enjoy the ceremony, the street parties, and of course the extra day off. 300 million will tune in. The world will see our country at its best, celebrating the beginning of a new chapter in our history. But it will also be a reminder of the loss of our late Queen, Elizabeth II, and a chance again to remember all that she gave to our country through her dedicated service. So will the Prime Minister join me in honouring our late Queen and wishing the new King a long and happy reign?
Mr. Speaker, as I said at the outset, we're all looking very much forward to the coronation. It will be a very special moment in the history of our country, and I know that we will join with the country in celebrating it. But before we get to the coronation weekend, Mr. Speaker, we have an important day tomorrow, and the choice before the country is clear. When they go to that ballot box, they can see a party that stands for higher council tax, higher crime, and a litany of broken promises, Mr. Speaker. Meanwhile, we're getting on with delivering what we say with lower council tax, lower crime, and fewer potholes. The choice is clear. Vote Conservative, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour run Kirklees Council, Mr. Speaker, as you know, have reneged on a deal to house the National Rugby League Museum at the George Hotel. They've also declared a climate emergency, but they have one of the worst recycling rates in the country. They're building on green fields and now on green belt. They're demolishing Home Firth Indoor Market. We're blighted by litter and fly tipping, and now they're proposing to chop down mature trees in urban areas. Does Mr. agree with me?
No, you'll sit down a moment. I presume you're going to ask a question. You made a great statement. Quick question.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that local people can have their say on Kirklees' appalling record by voting Conservative this week?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It's typical Labour saying one thing and doing the other, Mr. Speaker. It's only the Conservatives that are going to protect the Green Belt. It's a Labour Party that are going to concrete over it, and that's why in Kirklees and elsewhere, tomorrow, vote Conservative, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, in 2010, David Cameron convinced Nick Clegg to drop his pledge on university tuition fees. Does the Prime Minister intend to take the credit for convincing the leader of the Labour Party to do likewise?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for the question. I'd say it's hard to keep up, Mr. Speaker, with a list of broken promises. What I would say on tuition fees is I'm proud that under this government we now have a record number of people that are going to university from disadvantaged backgrounds, Mr. Speaker, and that's because the efforts we've placed to put more money into supporting those people and those communities to fulfil their aspirations, alongside fantastic new apprenticeships in every part of our country.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, for the avoidance of any doubt, the Liberal Democrats don't believe in abolishing tuition fees. The Conservatives don't believe in abolishing tuition fees, and of course the Labour Party, now with their own Nick Clegg moment, don't believe in abolishing tuition fees either. But, Mr. Speaker, is it not the case that the main Westminster parties don't offer young people any hope at all, do they?
Actually, I gently point out to the honourable gentleman that if you're from a disadvantaged background, you're far more likely to go to university in England than you are in Scotland.
Mr. Mulder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner in Dorset has delivered 174 new police officers. He's quadrupled the rural crime team and has made Dorset the 6th safest county. As recorded crime is 34% higher under Labour Police and Crime Commissioners, does the Prime Minister agree with me that only Conservatives can be trusted to keep local communities safe and make sure offenders face the justice they deserve?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right. It's a simple statement of fact. Crime is lower in areas which have Conservative police and crime commissioners, and I am delighted that Dorset has been selected as one of the areas to pilot our new immediate justice scheme, which will deliver swift and visible punishment so victims of antisocial behaviour know that it will be treated seriously and with all urgency.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. His government's vile and immoral refugee ban bill and the toxic language coming from the Home Office isn't even dog whistle politics. It is a giant, hard-right foghorn blasting out a poisonous them and us narrative, and it plumbed new depths last week when the Home Office Minister claimed that people trying to come to the UK, and I quote, tend to have completely different values to those in the UK. Can he explain what he thinks are so different about the values held by the people of war-torn Sudan? And can he tell us what values are stopping him from creating a Sudanese family visa scheme like he did for the people of Ukraine?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this country has a proud history of welcoming almost 500,000 refugees over the past several years, and we will always continue to do so. But our ability to do that is absolutely hampered when we have tens of thousands of people illegally crossing the Channel every year. And it's precisely because we want to help the most vulnerable people, whether they be in Syria and Afghanistan, Sudan and elsewhere. We must get a grip of this problem, break the cycle of the criminal gangs and target our resources and compassion on those who most need it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to this Conservative government and £1.8 million from the Brownfield Land Release Fund, the Conservative-led Solihull Council is getting on with regenerating Kingshurst Village Centre, creating space for new businesses and new homes. But when it comes to economic regeneration, none of the opposition parties have a viable plan, not the Greens, not the Lib Dems and not the Labour Party. And the Labour candidate has gone so far as to scare local people into thinking that the development won't go ahead, despite spades on the ground. So does the Prime Minister agree with me, while the opposition talk down opportunity and the creation of jobs, when it comes to investing in our communities, it's only the Conservative-led Solihull Council that can do the job?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend, and I'm so glad to see the local Conservatives delivering for the people of Solihull, with dozens of new family homes, new flexible commercial space and a new integrated health, social care and community hub. As he said, it's clear for his local area, only the Conservatives can deliver.
Alan Brown.
Mr. Speaker, imagine seeing the car in front of you swerving erratically or suddenly braking for no reason, risking your car slamming into the back of that, endangering those daft enough not to wear seat belts. Now, this is not the actions of a drunk or reckless driver, but my constituents' experience using Tesla in autopilot mode. Software still in beta phase, but deemed suitable for cars on our public roads. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss the issues with Tesla's autopilot and instigate an urgent critical safety review in terms of its suitability for operation and the licensing of it?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to hear about what happened to the honourable member's constituent. I'll ensure that he gets a meeting with the Transport Secretary to discuss the safe regulation of autonomous and self-driving vehicles.
Cal McCarthy.
Labour-run City of Lincoln Council has destroyed the 40-year reputation of our city's Christmas market and the Christmas cheer that Lincoln benefits from annually. The dereliction of their role, choosing to take the easiest option behind closed doors in secret, in cancelling the market, shows Labour's neglect and disregard for small local businesses, charities and entrepreneurs and voters. Labour councillors in Lincoln should be ashamed of their actions and have rightfully been likened to the Grinch.
Order. Mr. Brennan, I don't need you shouting from the back row. I've always offered a cup of tea to this side, but it's equally opportunity for you to take one. Come on, Carmen.
I thank the member from the opposite side for the extra minutes he's given me, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow the people of Lincoln will have the chance to remove...
I will not count on that.
Tomorrow the people of Lincoln will have the chance to remove from office the anti-business, socialist Scrooges and elect local Conservatives. Does my right honourable friend the Prime Minister agree with me that for better run local services, business-friendly and support...
Order. I think in fairness to Prime Minister, I think the text went out. I think he's got the answer. Come on, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I share my honourable friend's disappointment that after a decision taken by the Labour-run council behind, as he said, closed doors, there will no longer be a Christmas market in Lincoln, ending its 40 years of history. Lincoln deserves better, and I urge the people of the city to vote Conservative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ahead of tomorrow's local elections, I've been campaigning in Medway and Swindon. The word on the doorstep is that people are ready for a change and will be switching their votes from the Conservatives to Labour. However, I am concerned that only 4% of those without valid ID have applied online for a voter authority certificate. So will the Prime Minister commit to a post-election review of how many people have effectively been disenfranchised by his government's response to the virtually non-existent problem of voter fraud?
Mr. Speaker, 98% of people already possess a suitable form of voter ID, and the government made available free alternative ID for those that do not have it. The pilots have demonstrated it hasn't significantly impacted turnout, and indeed this was a policy that was introduced by the Labour Party in Northern Ireland all those years ago. It's common in European countries, it's common in Canada, and it's absolutely right that we introduce it here too.
Jagan Mahindra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since getting elected in 2019, I've been inundated with correspondence from my constituents in South West Hertfordshire, rightly complaining about huge speculative developments on our beautiful Greenbelt land. Lib Dem-controlled Three Rivers District Council continue to dither and delay their local plan. Does he agree with me that the choice tomorrow is simple? Vote Conservative to protect our Greenbelt, or vote Lib Dem for massive developments on sport land?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises an important point, and it's always the same with Liberal Democrats, saying one thing and doing the other. We've all seen it, Mr. Speaker. It's the Conservatives that are a party of local decisions taken by local people, and it's only the Conservatives that will protect the Greenbelt.
Bernie Kelly-Foy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unable to secure an NHS dental appointment, my constituent Ray was forced to go private. It was then discovered that he had a large aggressive tumour in his face and jaw, which required 16 hours of gruelling surgery to remove it. If he hadn't been able to afford it, Ray might not be with us now. This is yet another chapter in the horror story that is the decay of dentistry under this government's watch. So will the Prime Minister accept NHS dentistry is in crisis, and will he meet with me and the British Dental Association to ensure that no one loses their life because they couldn't get a dental appointment? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to hear what happened to the Honourable Lady's constituent, and that's why the NHS has recently reformed dental contracts to improve access. We now invest over £3 billion a year. There are over 500 more dentists working in the NHS this year than last year, and indeed discussions are ongoing between the Department for Health and the NHS around dentistry, and DHSC is planning to outline further reform measures in the near future.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Blow.
Every single young person that gets on the housing ladder under a Conservative government makes our communities more sustainable. Would my right honourable friend agree that in order to build the right type of housing and speed it up, we need to fund planning authorities properly through innovative funding?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, as ever, makes an excellent point, and that's why the reforms that we introduce will provide incremental resources to planning authorities to make sure that planning decisions can be taken quicker. But also, we've strengthened the ability of local communities to put in place local plans. Mr. Speaker, this is the best way for our towns, cities, villages to have control over the development in their area and make sure that it happens in the way that they're comfortable with, and I know that he's supportive of that too.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The recent ITV documentary Life and Debt Stories from the Edge followed Halifax mum Izzy. Her prepayment energy bills have tripled, and she was relying on a local primary school, Ash Green, who are providing free breakfast, budget cooking classes and a hardship fund for their families. When head teacher Mungo Shepherd is asked does he worry about the children at school when he goes home at night, he says all the time, it never leaves you. Does the Prime Minister think it's right that things are so bad that schools are having to become the fourth emergency service for the families that they support?
Well, Mr. Speaker, because of the actions we've taken, a typical family, including those like Izzy's, will be seeing half of their energy bills paid for by the government. That is support worth £1,500 extended in the most recent budget. For the most vulnerable in our society, there's additional support, and £900 for those on welfare, Mr. Speaker, and through the holiday activity and food programme, support for families with the cost and support for food during the holidays. But I would also say, for Izzy and others that are in particular need, they should talk to their council, because the Chancellor has provided over £1 billion of funding to the Household Support Fund. It's there to help families like that need a little bit of extra assistance during this time.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable friend will be aware, today is World Press Freedom Day. At a time when the need for professional and factual journalism has never been greater, will my right honourable friend reaffirm the government's commitment to defending media freedom worldwide? And will he redouble the efforts of the government to obtain the release of Evan Gershkovich and Vladimir Kara-Murza in Russia and of Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong?
Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to defending media freedom worldwide, because thriving independent journalism is one of the cornerstones of democracy. We absolutely condemn the politically motivated sentencing of journalists across the world, and our embassies and missions work every day to protect media freedom where they are based. And I know that this is something that my right honourable friend has been a right champion of throughout his career, and I will look forward to him continuing to do so from a different perch as I take rather fewer questions from him over the next few months from this position.
McKinnell.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank our police forces, who I know will be working hard across the country this weekend to support the coronation events. But police numbers in the North East are down 8% since 2010, and I know the Prime Minister's keen on his maths, so here's a sum. If Northumberland Police has lost 1,000 police officers since 2010, but gained the funding to put back 615, by how much have the Conservatives shortchanged the North East?
So, Mr. Speaker, as we saw last week, there are now a record number of police officers across the country thanks to the actions of this government, and crime is 50% lower than it was when we took office. She talks about investing in the North East. You know, when we invested Levelling Up Fund in her constituency, £20 million, she said it was transformational, Mr. Speaker. She said it would play an important role in rejuvenating her local area. That's this Conservative government delivering not just for the North East, but for her constituents too.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to welcome the Secretary of State for Transport to Newsham recently. This was to see the progress on the Northumberland line. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that this Conservative government, and Conservative government only, is committed to development of this line, keeping Levelling Up on track?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has been a fantastic champion for the restoration of this line. Indeed, it was one of the first deliveries from the Restoring Your Railways Fund, and it will be fantastic for his local communities because that connectivity will provide jobs, opportunity and employment, particularly for young people in his local area. And after years, if not decades of neglect, it's this Conservative government that is delivering for the people in his local area.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 3.6 million women born in the 1950s had their pension age increased without their knowledge. And many, like my constituent, unknowingly gave up work at 60, only to realise they had no income, they couldn't pay their bills, and some have even lost their homes. So my constituent asks the Prime Minister today, will he commit to the fair and fast payment of any compensation that is recommended by the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman to 1950s women for the injustice they have suffered due to maladministration by the Department for Work and Pensions?
Mr. Speaker, this issue has been long discussed in this place, and obviously the honourable lady knows there's an ongoing process which I can't comment on, but rest assured, of course, we will respond appropriately to any recommendations that come our way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As Asbestos Awareness Month comes to a close, I would like to draw the attention of the Prime Minister to the dangers of asbestos in workplace buildings. Please would you back the Don't Let the Dust Settle campaign from the Mesothelioma UK charity in my constituency by setting up a register of all workplaces in the country that contain asbestos and determine a timetable of eradication of this terrible substance.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue? The law does require duty holders to assess whether asbestos is present, what condition it is in, and whether it gives rise to a risk of exposure. And they must draw up a plan to manage this risk, which must include removal if it can't be safely managed where it is located. But I commend her for her continued campaigning on this important issue.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Nick swims regularly in the Thames at Shepperton. But after a recent dip, he found himself hospitalised with cellulitis for 13 days. His doctors think this was caused by polluted water. Mr. Speaker, what caused that polluted water? Well, because Thames Water dumped filthy sewage just days earlier nearby. So can the Prime Minister tell Nick and everybody else, why does he think it's okay for water companies to keep polluting our rivers for another 25 years?
Mr. Speaker, it was just last week that it was clear there's only one party that's going to protect the environment, and it's the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker. That's why we've given the Environment Agency more powers of enforcement. That's why we're moving to unlimited fines. And that's why we've got a clear plan to increase investment and increase monitoring of sewage overflows. It was a rank cynicism and hypocrisy of the party opposite that they could not even show up to support those plans, Mr. Speaker.
Anne-Marie Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Newton Abbot constituents face hosepipe bans after torrential spring storms, and are asking me why water catchment plans have not prevented this. Reservoirs, desalination plants and other natural catchment structures require siting where geography and geology allows. Is there a national strategy and implementation plan to increase water catchment and enable cross-water company water transfer to match regional demand to supply?
Yes. Well, Mr. Speaker, water companies publish water resources management plans which show how they will continue to provide a secure supply of water for customers, and I understand that they have been consulting on their latest drafts of these plans. And in my honourable friend's particular area of Devon and Cornwall, where temporary use bans are in place, DEFRA and the water regulators are closely working with South West Water to ensure that the company is taking all appropriate precautionary action to ensure that water supplies remain resilient this year.
That's all for now on Prime Minister's questions.
Well, as you heard there, the Speaker saying that's all for now from Prime Minister's questions for this week. The last one ahead of those local elections in England tomorrow. Let's welcome our guest for this part of Politics Live. For the Government, Business Minister Kevin Hollinrake. For Labour, Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Attorney General. And for the BBC, my colleague Nick Eardley, the Chief Political Correspondent. Welcome to all of you. Well, who'd have guessed there were local elections happening in England tomorrow? They're important for all sorts of reasons. And interestingly, Keir Starmer, perhaps not unsurprisingly, going broadly on cost of living, on the economy, and particularly on the sort of fallout, if you like, as he sees it, continued fallout from the budget when Liz Truss was Prime Minister and Kwasi Kwarteng was Chancellor, referring to how much more people are paying for their mortgages if they are coming off a fixed rate at the end of the year. Trading statistics, and Rishi Sunak retorted with his own statistics on housing. Who do you think came off best?
Well, look, both parties accept that the economy is going to be a massive battleground in the run-up to a general election. And what you saw Keir Starmer quite clearly try and do is say to Rishi Sunak, a lot of this is on not necessarily you, but your party, trying to link some of the cost of living pressures to that mini budget last year and the housing thing, which Labour think is going to be really important, saying you can't afford a house because they've dropped those targets. That, of course, was Rishi Sunak. It's interesting because Tory strategists actually think that the economy is something that Mr Sunak can do fairly well on, actually. He set himself some big targets on it that they're confident that he's seen is very different to Liz Truss. But you can absolutely see there the big battleground that's coming, and the thing the government is going to try and do time and time and time again is accuse Keir Starmer of not sticking to his pledges and mention all those U-turns. It's interesting they were both so passionate about the local elections. Someone just told me neither of them are actually voting tomorrow because they're both registered in places they don't have
well,
locals.
they're passionate on behalf of their colleagues who are going out, no doubt, campaigning for the last 24 hours or so. Kevin Hollinrake, starting with you. It is true, isn't it, that Keir Starmer is right. People, many more people, he said 930,000 more people will be paying more on their mortgages if they're coming off fixed rates because of the fallout from that mini budget.
No, that's not true. The short-term disruption to the market, the Bank of England have been very clear. That was short-term disruption. Where the mortgage rates are where they are today because the Bank of England are tackling inflation. And this is happening around the world. Any different jurisdiction you're looking at, interest rates are going up far more quickly in the US, for example. So increases in interest rates are a fact of life. It's part of how the Bank of England manages inflation.
And the reason for them increasing those rates for the Bank of England, do you think Liz Truss did no damage to the economy?
Not in terms of inflation, absolutely not. The inflation is a global issue, principally. 2/3 of inflation is energy prices. We know those are coming off now. Two of the 5 key priorities.
You should have kept her. You should have kept her as Prime Minister. She did nothing wrong.
I'm a big fan of Rishi Sunak, and I think he's the right person to do the job.
But you're defending Liz Truss and her record in terms of the economy.
No, I'm saying there were short-term effects. What Rishi is doing is 5 pledges, the 2 key pledges that are really of material interest to most people, are getting the economy growing again and tackling inflation, halving inflation by the end of the year. Most observers see that will happen. If you want to be able to control inflation, you need to be able to manage the money properly, which is what Rishi Sunak will do.
Right. And is Keir Starmer right, then, Emily, that more people, or is Kevin right, that actually people won't be paying more in their mortgages or for their mortgages as a result of that budget when Liz Truss was Prime Minister?
Yeah, I mean, the Conservatives crashed the economy. I think more than 800,000 people are already paying more since Liz Truss crashed the economy, since the Tories crashed the economy. And then there's going to be another million. So by the end of the year, there'll be 2 million more people spending more on their mortgages. And it doesn't matter how often the Conservatives say, nothing to see here, everything's fine, everything's better. You know, they just gaslight us. But people know the truth. They know how much their food prices are going up. They know how much their house prices are going up. They know that. But essentially, after 13 years of a Tory government, they are not any richer. They are much poorer. And that's the truth. And the Tories want to talk about anything else apart from the cost of living. They want to talk about anything else apart from crime. You know, I mean, or the National Health Service. You see during this election, they just keep trying to throw yet one dead cat after another dead cat on the table, hoping that somehow or other we'll all get distracted. But actually, these are the 3 issues that people are talking to me about. And they are the big 3 issues for the public.
Kevin?
Well, if you want the truth, you ask for the truth, Emily. The reason we got into Liz Truss got into trouble are unfunded spending and tax spending promises and tax cuts. But that's exactly what Labour promised to do.
Oh, yeah,
the annual deficit this year is around £140 billion. Your spending promises, unfunding spending promises,
which ones?
add up to about £100 billion.
Give me one.
Cancelling business rates, for example. Cancelling tuition fee, university tuition fees. Cancelling business rates, abandoning completely. We're setting aside the business rates. You've already said you'll do that. Tuition fees, you've already said you'll scrap tuition fees. These are a number of different pledges.
Well, hang on. Let's just pick you up on the tuition fees. I'm sure Emily can do it anyway. I think actually today's story is that Keir Starmer is dropping his opposition to tuition fees. So actually they will stay in place under a Labour government.
And we've already talked about
it. Good news, Emily?
And we've already... Well, hang on. There's so many questions. Right. First of all, you start off with these extraordinary claims about us not having funded commitments. I mean, it is simply not right. If you look at any of our commitments, they have all been costed. I'm telling you, there is enormous discipline in the Labour Party about that. We do make sure that we don't make an announcement without being able to show where the money comes from.
Business rates coming from? £22 billion a year.
So business rates will come from... I mean, the idea is that we redistribute taxation from the larger businesses to the smaller businesses. So that what we're going to do is we're going to stick with the taxes to the larger companies, and we will be getting...
Which taxes?
I can't remember exactly which ones it is now. I think it's the higher business rates, higher business taxes, and so businesses of a certain size will continue to be paying that higher amount, and that money will be transferred to smaller businesses. In that we will not.
It's good to hear the details. We've never heard that detail before from Rachel Reeves.
Yes,
absolutely.
You really need to pay more attention. You really need to pay more attention to what it is we're saying, because everything that we say, we will spend money on this, and we will get the money from that. And I'll tell you, people also criticise us for being so disciplined. You know, I mean, when we hear about other people will be saying, well, why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? What we say is, because you crashed the economy, if we are given the honour of serving the country in a year's time or 2 years' time, we will not be able to do everything that we want to do.
No,
we will have to proceed with caution and care, and everything that we do will be costed.
Can I just go back to your point about the Conservatives crashing the economy? You're referring again to Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. But actually, at the time, Labour supported, and subsequently, supported the bulk of what was announced by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. You supported the 2-year energy support package. You also supported the reversal of the increase in national insurance contributions and a cut in the basic rate of income tax. And that was the bulk of that budget. So actually, Labour was quite happy with most of...
Let's start with the first of that. So the whole point about paying for support for people on their bills.
You wanted 6 months, first of all, and then it was 2 years.
We have always said that that we needed to have a tax on the larger on these energy companies that are making so much money out of essentially out of the crisis caused by
but you
Ukraine.
supported
and they have never introduced their plans in the way that we have suggested. It has never been properly effective. You know, what they do is they sort of half nick our ideas, but unfortunately never implement them as well as they should do.
Right.
You know, and it's never extensive enough, and that's what the problem is.
Right, but you did support the bulk of it on those 3 particular issues. I mean, Rachel Reeves herself said, we've always said that increasing national insurance, which went up in April, this she's talking about last year, was the wrong thing to do. She said, we support the cut in the basic rate of tax from 20 to 19 pence and broadly supported the extended energy package of 2 years. So actually, there was very little about that Liz Truss quasi-quoting that at the time you didn't support.
I don't think that's right. And I think that part of the problem as well was that Kwasi Kwarteng went on to be interviewed, you know, and to say, we're going further and we're doing more and we don't care. And the way that they did it was they didn't allow anything to be costed in advance. They didn't allow any of their proposals.
That is true.
No, I mean, this is important when it comes to confidence. And because of the crash in confidence, we had a crash in the economy.
All right.
It is how you do things as much as anything else, which is really important.
Nick?
Kevin, I'm really interested in this argument that there hasn't been a longer-term impact from the Liz Truss mini-budget, because at the time of that mini-budget, mortgage rates shot up to a 14-year high. And if you were coming off a mortgage and signing up to a new one at the time, today you're paying potentially hundreds of pounds extra a month. Should voters blame the Conservative Party for that?
No, because that was a spike. If you look at it, the mortgage rate shot up because of the connection with bond prices, and that was the change that happened at the time. If you listen to the Bank of England, and I was on the Treasury Select Committee, they were quite clear that short-term disruption has now come out of the profile.
You're talking about something different. I'm talking about people who signed up to mortgages when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, and in a few weeks after that mini-budget, they are paying a premium.
And they're trapped on that.
Well, I don't see that as being the case. I think whatever would have happened, whatever would have happened, if the mortgage rates are now stabilised 4 to 5%, that's what most people are paying. Back then, when you're coming off a fixed...
Okay, I'm done with this crack pottery. Fuck it, I can't cope. Like, did these live on fucking planet Earth? You just actually a basic question. Did more people pay more tax because Liz Truss literally resigned because she was the worst Prime Minister we've ever had? Ever. No, I don't see it that way. Can you fucking jump off a cliff? You fucking literal fucking toad. Boggles the mind. It really does. And he literally has the power to vote in the House of Parliament. It's like I'm watching Futurama, Simpsons, South Park. Everything just rolled into some mad fucking fictional TV show. And the sad part is, it's literally real. Do I live in fucking... You know what? I feel like I'm on a feral planet in the setting of Warhammer 40k. Literally, I need the Emperor of mankind to come and save me from these heretics. For fuck's sake. Jesus fucking Christ.
Off a fixed rate and now off a fixed rate. So there hasn't been a noticeable spike for those people.
There will have been for some people.
Well, in many cases...
My question is, should they attach that to Liz Truss and the Conservative Party?
Well, I don't believe so, because I say that profile was there anyway.
No, should you attach that she was the worst Prime Minister we've ever had? What do you mean, should? It's like saying, is the sky fucking blue? Don't know. Is it? Looks fucking blue to me. You know, just saying. Liz Truss was the worst Prime Minister we've ever fucking had. She was crap. She cost the country 40 billion quid. Literally overnight. I've never seen any Prime Minister be as shit as Liz Truss. Let's remember, ladies and gentlemen, we had a national newspaper that literally said, which one's gonna last longer? A fucking lettuce or the Prime Minister? Guess which one won? Guess which one won? Are we forgetting the madness that is Liz Truss? Like, what the fuck? These Tories are batshit crazy, bro. Like, oh my God, get out of power already, you fucking insane cunts.
The mortgage rates today are similar, if not a little bit higher than they were at the time that short-term disruption happened. Nevertheless, it wasn't a good time in terms of it was the wrong policy.
You literally, like, I watch a lot of American politics, by the way. Just so you guys know, I'm a politics junkie, right? Or political junkie, I should say. That's not even grammatically correct. Anyway, point being is, I watch American politics. They are bizarre liars, like bizarre. Whatever. Anyway, I'm not surprised anymore that these politicians are just as bad as American ones. More so the Republicans. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of the Democrats either, to be quite frank. But, oh my fucking God, it's like they just change reality in their mind, and then, like, if you tell enough lies, then people begin to think it's the truth. That's literally what's going on. If you keep blagging everybody, no, Liz Truss was the best Prime Minister ever, even though she only lasted 45 days. Why did she last 45 days? Let's not talk about that shit, shall we? She was a great Prime Minister. I voted for her. Yeah? And you wonder why the country's a fucking joke. Ever since you twats took over, the country's been on its fucking ass. You fucking morons. I hate the Tories. I don't know why people voted for them after Thatcher, like something was gonna change. Oh, they're not the Labour. They're not the they're not the Tories of the 80s. Can't be. We've got Panface in charge. He looks a bit like fucking Tony Blair. I mean, you can't make this shit up. Oh, just wow. Fucking hell. I need a spliff. Another one. Just listen to this guy, freaks me out. I can't believe these people literally run our country. What the actual fuck?
Choices. My point is we've moved on from that. We've got the right stewardship now in number 10. We are where we find ourselves. My worry is for the country, whether you're voting tomorrow or you're voting at the general election, is Labour would fall into the same trap. The unfunded spending. It's the same old Labour. It's the unfunded spending promises, the unfunded potential tax cuts.
Can we just clarify for our viewers who have found themselves in the position that Nick Eardley has just outlined, they will have had to find hundreds, possibly thousands of extra pounds for however long, if they were on or if they signed up to a fixed rate then, even if they were on a tracker, they will have had to have paid.
Bitch, it was literally on question time. That poor woman got a fucking mortgage. She just got a mortgage. Liz Truss is in power. 10% interest. It was at like 4. I think it was 4. She got it at 3 or 4 or some shit, and then she found out it was like 10. I mean, come on. Are you kidding me? Liz Truss got the sack because she was diabolical. Come on. Can we not please pretend that Liz Truss wasn't our Prime Minister? She literally exists. She still sat as an MP somehow in the House of Commons. She should have just resigned, left the job, go away, hide under a rock. No, you know what she did? She made a batshit crazy speech in America to the most right-wing bunch of fucking balls you've ever seen in your fucking life. But then, that's the problem with fucking our politics. They want to be as batshit crazy, apparently, as the fucking Americans. Can we stop being American, please? Can the fucking BBC get a handle on its journalism and stop posing theoretical fucking questions like you don't exist in our own fucking country? Like the media is as bad as the politicians. No jokes. It's like the media don't live in our fucking country. I'm going to ask you a question. Is the sky blue? I don't know. Let's have a debate. Why are we debating if the sky's fucking blue? Like, really? We've had the worst time in history under the Tories. No jokes. This makes Thatcher look good in comparison, and she was a fucking mong. By any stretch of anyone's imagination, she was a fucking cunt. We used to put that bitch on a bonfire. The Tories are even worse now than they were under Thatcher. Do you know why? Because these fuckers are incompetent. At least Thatcher had a clue. No jokes. She was a ruthless cunt. But she knew what she was doing. These fucking morons literally couldn't run a piss up in a fucking brewery. And that's our country. Everybody's on strike. Inflation, my fucking ass. Clearly bullshit. If you believe that bollocks, you're fucking stupid anyway. Oh, it's inflation. No, it's not. It just isn't. Shut up. When was the last time someone got a pay rise and there's suddenly inflation? Problem is, the fucking bank, our credit card, has been pumping all the fucking money to all the rich bastards. That's causing inflation, you fucking idiots. Like the pension pot nearly crashed. You know why? Because they're all gambling your pension money. That's what happened in 2010, remember? Gambling, banks, just saying. Now they want everybody to buy a house that you can't afford, which means take on more debt, which you can't afford. Fucking stupid fucking capitalism's eating its ass and these are the fucking cheerleaders of it. Stupid fucking cunts.
A certain amount of money over and above what they were expecting to pay for several months at the very least. Can you just accept that? And that voters, those voters particularly, will be very cross with the Conservatives.
Well, I don't see there's a noticeable difference between mortgage rates today and mortgage rates back then. That's my point on this. So to try and draw some analogy between the two different positions, I think is the wrong thing.
No, it's about the experience of voters and mortgage payers who found themselves paying more for their mortgages as a direct result. Of what happened in that mini-budget.
Principally, people are paying higher rates on their mortgages because of the Bank of England's action to tackle inflation. That's
all right.
the reality.
All right, well, let's move on to something else. Perhaps you can be clearer when it...
Oh my god. I was on mute. Oh, that was a good thing. What a lying cunt. Literally a fucking lying cunt.
When it comes to mandatory house targets, because Keir Starmer has decided that a Labour...
Can't cope. Me brain's melting. There's only like 5 minutes left. If I just shut up, it's just only 5 minutes left, honestly. What the fuck?
The government would re-establish or reinstate mandatory housing targets on local authorities. Rishi Sunak dropped that policy and plan. How will you get those houses built?
Well, the reason those plans were changed because the impact on the Greenbelt, of course. Well, yes, MPs. To a certain extent, because they're worried about the Conservative MPs are worried about the impact on the Greenbelt. And I think many people want to make sure our green and pleasant land is retained as that. Now, if you look at our record on house building is very successful in terms of the Conservatives. In 2010, I was in the property market for a long time, and I can promise you it absolutely was. I think 135,000 homes built in 2010. Last year, over 220,000 homes being built.
220?
220,000 homes.
Right, and most people think you need to build hundreds and hundreds of thousands of new homes. And it's pressure from Conservative MPs that those mandatory house targets were dropped. But Labour, if they do put back those housing targets, how will you get local authorities to build them?
We're going to do it on a regional basis, and it's really important that we do, because this is a matter of intergenerational justice.
Yeah. But
our
how do you
generation
do it?
are fine.
Local
but
authorities struggle.
We're either in secure social housing, or we're owning our own homes. It's the younger generation who are in the rented market, and we have to find the space, and we have to build. We have to build, and we will have those targets, and we will expect local authorities to stick to it. And I'm afraid, there won't be any ifs or buts, and we're not going to bow to any pressure, in the way in which the Conservatives had. That this is the way that it needs to be done. Well, there has to be every region in the country. You need to look at the regional need, and then you need to build houses in an appropriate way for that.
So you'll force local authorities to build homes in areas, even if local people have said they don't want them?
We need to ask the local people's local children, don't we? We need to ask the teenagers and the people in the 20s, because...
No, stop asking questions. What's this, Twitter? A government run by Twitter? Or we need to actually fuck the local people. They're the ones who are complaining they haven't got a fucking house. Shut up. No, don't ask them, just build houses. Like, fucking get on with it already, you pointless fucking cunts. These pandering little bitches. We need to build. Just build the fucking houses. Don't sell me one, though. Because no one can afford them, you fucking tramps. Do you want to buy a house for 80 grand? I go to a food bank. Are you having a fucking laugh? Have you seen the state of our country under these Tories? And you want me to buy a house? Fucking jokers. The fact that that's even a fucking sentence in anybody's vernacular when it comes to our country anymore, buying a house. I'm just saying. People in like literal fucking food poverty, fucking mad shit. And the only thing on the BBC is buying a house. What the actual fuck?
Do you know what? Whenever there's a planning meeting, it's always the people in the 50s and 60s who've got housing who'll turn up and complain. But it won't be the youngsters for whom those houses are needed, the families that need it. You know, we need to make sure that we're building homes for everyone. I mean, we're not concreting over the green belt, which seems to be the, you know, the Tories say you either build no homes or you concrete over the green belt. The public know better than that. The public know that we need to build more homes, that we have a chronic housing crisis in the country, and the only answer is to build more homes.
And the proof in the pudding is that 55 local authorities since that announcement by Rishi Sunak have abandoned their mandatory house targets.
I think what is important here, and I agree that we should be building more homes for young people to purchase. We all agree with that, and that's why we stepped in with things like Help to Buy, which we very successfully got more first-time buyers on the housing ladder, the mortgage guarantee programme.
All that does is increase housing prices. You know that.
It gives young people the opportunity you and I had, Emily, and that's what it does. It's absolutely right. 95% mortgages have been around for decades, as you know, including under a Labour government. You know, of course, we need to do more for first-time buyers.
So you need to read a great book by Noam Chomsky. It's called Manufacturing Dissent. Fucking glorious book, honestly. One of the best books ever. When it comes to all these fucking retards, literally brainwashed the public. With their own stupidity. That's the best bit. They don't even know that they're actually bullshitting. They just say it. If you don't believe me, you can look up an actual interview with Andrew Marr and Noam Chomsky. When Noam Chomsky calls him a fucking idiot right to his face, and he says, "Why did you call me an idiot?" It's because you fucking are one, and you just don't notice it. Like these fucking muppets. They literally say the weirdest shit, like they don't live in our country. And you're just thinking, why? Who the fuck elected you at this point? Who? What person?
Buyers for young people to get on the housing ladder. It's not just about how many homes are being built, it's what type of homes. Increasingly we're seeing homes being developed, lots of larger homes, 3- and 4-bedroom homes rather than smaller homes for first-time buyers. That's why we brought forward something called the First Home Scheme, so where young first-time buyers on lower incomes can buy a home at up to half price. So there are lots of different schemes available to first-time buyers that will make a meaningful difference.
Before we move on, Nick?
The last Conservative manifesto had that 300,000 a year new homes target by the end of the decade, which is gone. Emily, is that the sort of numbers Labour are talking about, 300,000 a year?
I think that a successful government that is dealing with the housing crisis has to build hundreds of thousands of homes.
How many hundreds of thousands, though? Because this is the question that's always asked of Labour. You say you want to do something in principle, but how many? Because the Conservatives had that target last time.
I mean, I think that as we get closer to an election, you will start seeing those sorts of numbers come out. But I think at the moment, what we need to make absolutely clear, and Keir is making it absolutely clear, is that the only way to deal with the housing crisis is to build more homes, which means that we cannot allow pressure from local authorities or from MPs to. I mean, you know, the Prime Minister understands that in his bones. He understands that. You understand that in your bones. But unfortunately, the Prime Minister is too weak and succumbed to pressure from his backbenchers, which is why we're not building any homes.
Right. Well, in terms of changing tack and policy, let's have a look at this headline in the Times. Starmer abandons tax rise plan for the top 5%. We've talked very briefly about the commitment to scrapping tuition fees, but he's confirmed, the Labour leader, he no longer supports increasing income tax for the top 5% of earners, and has also said he would drop his plans to abolish tuition fees. Both, of course, were key pledges when he was campaigning to be leader of the Labour Party. Can we trust anything Keir Starmer says?
No.
OK, so I do think...
No, he can't. He's a politician. But at the same time, would I rather have him in charge than the Tories? Fucking yes. is the point. Yes. If you don't like Keir Starmer, I get it. I'm not a big fan. I would rather have Jeremy Corbyn. No jokes. I just really would. I would prefer Bernie Sanders to be president of the United States. Seems like a geezer. Someone you'd have a pint down and a spliff down the pub or whatever. Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn, you can definitely see them having a cider and a spliff in the smoking garden, if you get what I'm saying. These twats, no. But I would still rather have Keir Starmer than Rishi, I'm a billionaire, but not as rich as my wife, billionaire, in charge.
Personally, that if circumstances change, that one needs to be pragmatic. I think that actually we were just talking about Liz Truss, and we were just talking about how things go if you have a certain dogma and you stick to it no matter what the circumstances are. And I mean, since Keir made the promises during the leadership election, what have we had? We've had the Tories crash the economy. We've had Ukraine. We've had the pandemic. We've had all of these different.
No, he should have just said, we're not going to do it yet, but I remain a principal advocate of not charging kids to get education at university, because we never used to, did we? Oh, well, because they're private, we need to pay them. No, bro, no. If we want the best and the brightest, why are you putting them in debt, literally, for getting educated? You know what we should do? We should put a tax on all the massive corporations instead. Make them pay for school. Just saying. Make all the massive corporations consider they need us, not the other way around. It's a bit weird, isn't it? I mean, it's not like you can go and have your own farm or anything, is it? Because you're not allowed to. So you have to be someone else's bitch for the rest of your life until you get rich enough where then you get bitches, if you get the point. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, really, isn't it? When you're a pleb. That's why I love Monty Python. I am king of the Britons. Who the fuck are they? Who are they? Who are the Britons? You think you're in charge because some fucking watery bint threw a scimitar at you? I mean, you can't make it up. You can't. Now buy a house, you fucking cunt. But I've got no money. Buy it anyway. Yeah, there's some money. Go into debt. Fuck you. Buy a house.
Different issues, and the fact is that what we will.
But I can't. I've got enough. I haven't got enough money to eat. Buy a house. It's good for you. Young people, buy houses. You little fucking. I'm trying. What is that stupid fucking thing they put on toast? Avocado. Fucking stop eating your avocado on toast and buy a fucking house. You little twerps. Okay? And get off the black internet, even though that sounds racist. What is it? The black internet? Dark web. There we go. What's the PC? Oh my god, I kill me. I should be a stand-up comedian. Really, I should.
Will do.
I like my jokes.
If we are given the opportunity to serve, is that we will be pragmatic about it.
But if your claim about the government and the Conservatives crashing the economy is true, why is Keir Starmer and why is the Labour Party dropping two key pledges, which dropped others as well, which would raise money? For instance, increasing taxes on the top 5%. Well, that would raise money, and tuition.
I just triggered someone in the side chat. Avocado on toast is life. Okay, I take it back. I don't want to hurt your feelings. Okay, something else you put shitty on toast. I'm just saying, someone's getting blanked at this point. It's me. Oh, I'm not a hipster. Okay, I play computer games. What does that make me a boomer / hipster? I don't know. Fucking hell. No, I can't be a boomer. I'm not that old. I'm just fucking I'm an in-betweenie. That's exactly what I am.
Fees. Obviously, he's dropped his opposition to scrapping it. That's also not going to help in terms of the economy.
So we're going to inherit a hell of a mess. I mean, the economy is going to be.
Can I just say, though, the vast majority of people who do go to university never end up paying their tuition fee because they end up working at fucking McDonald's or some other stupid company where they don't get paid enough to even cross the threshold where you'd even notice that the government's saying, give us our money back, even though it's your money anyway. You pay more in taxes than going to school. So the whole entire concept of paying for tuition is fucking legitimately stupid. If you go to like Oxford or Cambridge or a literal private school, that makes sense. I don't think we should abolish private schools at all. I think we should abolish paying for them. which makes no sense. Maybe what we should do is give them free money if they actually open more world-class institutions instead of just having one or two. Maybe we should open a group of them. You know, like a chain of Tesco's. Just saying, we rank Tesco's and food stores. Maybe we should rank our schools, and they should make more of them, better ones, not shite ones. Education is key. Pink Floyd for the win.
So you're going to need to raise money, so why don't you increase the income tax at the top?
An economy that is in a terrible mess with the highest taxation rate that we have seen for 70 years. So we need to be able to balance those various things and to come forward. And what we've said about tuition fees, for example, is, Keir's made it clear that clearly he understands that the current circumstances are unfair. We need to make sure that we look at that again, and we need to come forward with proposals that are much fairer to students, to their families, to society, to the universities. And we will come forward with that closer to a general election, but we need to have something that's going to work in the circumstances that we find ourselves now or next year after a general election.
But you can see what voters would think, that he hasn't and isn't standing by any of his main key pledges, the same with nationalising key utilities. I mean, these are quite core principles, even taking into account the Ukraine war and the pandemic. What do you think the message that voters will take away from that?
I think the message that voters will take away is that Keir Starmer wants to transform our economy. He wants to make it fairer. He wants to make it greener. He wants to look after those who are most marginalised. Those principles still stand. We need to be able to look after public services. Now, all of these things are still matters that are of huge importance. And do you know what voters will also think? They also may remember that no matter what, all of those terrible things that have hit our economy, Sunak stood last year, after all of those things had hit the economy, for election for the second time, and said things like, the housing targets. He also talked about abandoning or getting rid of all legislation passed by the EU, and has abandoned both of those. Are the Tories being criticised for that? Are they being pushed on this? These matters. I mean, in the end, you will see changes that need to be made in a pragmatic way.
Yeah. Well, that's the same with Rishi Sunak, because Emily is right. There are some things that he has dropped, but perhaps the most important one was his pledge last summer when he was also in a leadership contest, and that was to cut taxes and cut them quite dramatically. I think we can have a look at what he said from last August. Or maybe not.
I am going to cut taxes, and that's why today I set out a radical set of reforms to cut the basic rate of income tax by a fifth under my leadership. Because as Conservatives, we believe in hard work. I want to reward hard work and allow people to keep more of their hard-earned money. So under me, income taxes will fall, and they will fall at the fastest rate since Nigel Lawson and Margaret Thatcher.
Well, what's happened? That was last summer when he was campaigning to be leader of the Conservative Party, and we now have the highest tax burden we've had for 70 years.
Well, Rishi Sunak does believe in cutting taxes.
No, he said he would. Taxes. He doesn't say believe, he said he would cut taxes. Oh, yeah.
But you want to do it at the right time. You have, as we saw last autumn, and we have to learn the lessons from it, is that you can't take the markets for granted. You cannot take the markets for granted. So what he's had to do is balance the books. That's a very difficult challenge right now because of many different factors, principally
But he's increased taxes, Kevin. It's not just not cutting.
Okay, someone remind me why Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister of the UK again. Oh, right, Liz Truss got sacked. Totally forgot that. Totally forgot that part. It's amazing. Literally, no one talks about Liz Truss. Like she disappeared. No, I would literally stick Liz Truss on every single fucking bit of Labour fucking propaganda I could find. Just stick her face on it and just say, how much did she cost you? She did more fucking damage in 45 days than fucking Margaret Thatcher did in 18 fucking years. No kidding. Like, she even managed to kill the Queen. How'd you do that? How'd you kill the Queen, lose to a lettuce, and be the stupidest Prime Minister all at the same time? Oh, yeah, we let the Tories vote for her. Fuck my life.
Them. He's raised them.
You have to balance the books. That's what we believe in. I think most people understand that. Yeah. What Rishi will do, in my view, and this obviously will I think happen either before the next election or hopefully in the Parliament after.
He made a mistake, though, didn't he? He made a mistake making such a firm pledge and such a dramatic pledge to cut income tax in the way that Nigel Lawson did under Margaret Thatcher.
What Rishi's is, I think, I know Rishi Sunak came into Parliament in 2015.
Yeah.
He's very clear. He's got a clear ideology. He's a low tax. I remember his first speech in Parliament. It's about low taxation, and he will cut taxes.
There is no low taxation.
When we balance the books, you have to balance the books.
Right.
Most people understand that.
On the back of higher taxes.
Well, for a period of time, that's what's had to happen. Principally around corporation tax. That's the biggest tax increase.
Freezing actually the tax thresholds, dragging many hundreds of thousands more people into paying high rates of tax.
By many people, including the Resolution Foundation, as being the most progressive way.
I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. What I'm saying is, why should voters trust what Rishi Sunak says?
What Labour will not, it's the same old Labour, they will not balance the books.
Right.
They will not take the difficult decisions. We hear time and time again, spending pledges, and whilst not saying how they're going to pay for them. What Rishi has done, we had to spend a fortune on COVID and in terms of the cost of living crisis to help people through that.
But that's why the two pledges that I was talking about was the second time he stood for election. So the second time he stood for election as leader, he talked about the housing targets and that he was going to get rid of every EU law. So both of those things are very, very recent and post Liz Truss. They're pledges that he made and he's switched.
Well, I don't think that was his pledge, but he decided to reverse something that had been put in place. You're right, he was probably Chancellor at the time under Boris Johnson. Can we just talk about Sue Gray at the end? Not everyone will know who Sue Gray is or the importance of her position. Bring us up to date.
Former senior civil servant associated with the Boris Johnson Partygate report, who's quit the civil service to go and be Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. She's not in the job yet because she's going through the process where you have to wait and see what this independent body says about top civil servants going to work for political parties. There was a bit of a row in government over the last few days about what exactly the Cabinet Office was going to accuse her of. There are some in government privately accuse her of breaking the rules, privately say they think she was talking to Labour when she shouldn't have been. We got this mysterious statement from the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, yesterday that said...
Not true.
Very little.
It's not true.
Said that she hadn't cooperated with the inquiry, but none of the more explosive claims.
All right.
Can't stand them up because they're not true.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there for now. There'll be more on that, no doubt, in the coming days. From all of us here, though, goodbye. Don't forget, local elections tomorrow, and I'll be back on Friday.
Don't forget. Oh, don't remind me, bro. I got my popcorn ready. Got my little map. Everton. I'm going full balls deep. John Dimbleby on this motherfucker. Look, it's going to be boring as fuck, just saying. It will be boring as fuck. But hey, it'll be interesting. I mean, you'll have me to keep you company. Way better than these waffly bastards. I mean, talk complete bollocks anyway most of the time. In fact, 99% of the time. The only part that's true is saying goodbye on these shows. Because it's not really good morning, is it? If you have to look up fucking Tory.
Friday with a special programme at midday.
Twat. Anyway, that was most of today's show. I did have to talk at the end, though. You know, just saying. You know me and housing, can't stand it. One of my pet peeves. As soon as you say housing, I'm just thinking twat automatically. But that's it all for today. We'll be back tomorrow, as you know, because it's Thursday. Don't think Question Time's on tomorrow, though, ladies and gentlemen. And if it is, it'll probably be on BG2. I doubt Question Time's going to be on tomorrow. I doubt it. I'd have to check. Anyway, love you, leave you. Enjoy the rest of your day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm about to chill, have a spliff, and enjoy the